I'm an avid Reddit user, although not usually on this sub, but after sharing just a snippet of this story elsewhere, I was encouraged to share it here. This took place about 7 summers ago in the hometown of the Dallas Cowboys. While I'm not from there originally, I'd been living there for quite some time, and I was aware that it was far from a perfect city. I knew that there was a huge human trafficking issue. I actually had a coworker pulled out of work and put in a safe house by the FBI because she decided to snitch on her family, who was involved in such things. However, I never thought that these people randomly snatched people off the streets. In all the stories I'd ever heard, there was the use of drugs or some form of coercion. So this particular summer, I'm cycling to a smoke shop. It's kind of out of my way and not in a great part of the city, but I'm pretty confident. It's daylight out. I ride all over the city and I know the store. At the time, I was 24, short, and had short pink hair, but I'd always considered myself too intimidating to kidnap. I forget that even if I'm a veteran, I'm also a short white girl. I pull up to a crosswalk and I'm waiting for a light when 2 guys start catcalling me from a windowless white van. Now, just like most other young women, I'm not impervious to getting catcalled. But this wasn't the classical nice tits comment or other locker room bullshit. These guys would take turns talking to each other and then yell through a cracked window about how they were going to get me or that I was next. It felt off, like they were particularly excited to see a single woman by herself. But I just flipped them both off and rode away. End of the story, right? Well, over a mile later, I'm right around the block from my destination. To set up the visual, there was this massive empty lot, really more like 2 lots on my right-hand side. That was the side that I was riding down. To my left, there was a back fence of a very, very old and likely abandoned house. It was like that all around this neighborhood. A lot of drifters and old people in poverty. A few trap houses even. The point is, there was no one else visible, and even if they had seen what I'm about to explain, nobody would have intervened at all, out of fear for their own safety. I'm pedaling along when the album I'm listening to ends, and I think to myself, I'm almost there. I don't need to stop and fumble with my phone for a new song. I firmly believe that this decision saved my life. As I'm thinking this, a white van pulls up on my left and stays right inside of my peripheral vision. They revved the engine a few times and seemingly tried to spook me, but something told me not to move. Don't let them know that you know type stuff. So I acted like my music was playing and pedaled just a little bit faster. Up ahead of me was a brick wall to my left and a tall tree over it before an alley entrance. Suddenly this van punches the gas and they pull up in front of me, stopping right next to the brick wall. I know now that they were trying to corner me, to funnel me right to their back door, putting me in a position where I had to ride between their door and the wall. This all happened in the span of maybe 5 seconds. I honestly didn't feel an ounce of panic. I didn't actively register any fear or sweat or anything. It was like someone much calmer had taken over my body and was like, nope. I remember instantly crossing the street without even thinking about the movements or why I was doing them. As I pedaled up the other side, I realized that this van was the one from before, and now it had a window repair magnet on the side. The magnet itself was too small to look good and had absolutely no contact info on it, just a generic name. I kept rubbernecking, and that's when I see that there was no one in the front seat anymore, but there were movements coming from behind the seats. It was clear to me that the guys were in the back by the door. They had planned to drag me off of my bike, off the street, and do God knows what to me. Once I passed them, they scrambled back into the front seat and pulled off so hard that they burnt rubber. I got to the store safely, but I still hate myself for not taking the license plate number down. Not that it would have done any good. They likely would have switched them out later. I knew that I had almost been kidnapped, or worse, but it wasn't until I told this story to someone from Mexico that I realized these were likely traffickers. The person I shared this story with said that this story sounded all too sadly familiar and happens all the time below the border. Personally, I have no family, and my roommates are just roommates. I would have been gone for about a week before anyone decided that something was wrong. And even then, they would have just known that I left on my bike and vanished. I would have been dead or across the border before anyone ever knew I was gone. And that thought is one that still gives me chills at night. I was once telling a friend about a stalker that I had, and she referred me to this forum. This happened years ago, but it still affects me to this day. I apologize in advance for the length, but I feel like I have to tell the entire story. The summer after I graduated high school, I was still living at home. I was up late one night and was packing for a camping trip with my friends. It was unbelievably hot, and I had the window open as I sat and folded clothes. I remember it being around 2 a.m, and the next thing I knew, there was a hand coming through the gap between my window and the windowsill. I instantly screamed, and the hand flew back out. I was stunned, but there was a part of me that wondered if it was my younger brother pranking me. I got up, looked out the window, and just saw the figure of a man standing out in the dark, staring back at me. I ran into my brother's room, and he was there playing video games. I knew then that he had nothing to do with this. We called the police, who came and searched the area. They found nothing, but they warned me and my parents to lock the windows and doors before leaving. We were all still a bit shaken up, and my mom had a feeling that whoever this was, they would come back. Turns out her mother's intuition was correct. She went outside and waited on her back porch. After 20 minutes or so, she saw a man dressed all in black slink into our backyard along the tree line. There wasn't a fence on that side, unfortunately. He hid behind a tree for a few seconds, then ran to another tree and hid there as well, slowly working his way back towards my window. My mom let him get 3 or 4 trees into this dance before she yelled something at him, and he took off running. The police came back out yet again, but found no trace of him. I never opened that window again, not even the curtains for it. My parents installed some motion detecting lights, and that seemed to be the end of it. About 6 months later, my friend and I got an apartment together downtown. We were really excited as this was our first place of our own. The apartment wasn't exactly the best quality, but it was so fun to be living in the city. The downside was that there was only street parking. After a few weeks, my car was broken into. Nothing was taken, but a single rose sat on the passenger seat. It was creepy, but I vowed to be vigilant and safe. I always tried to park close to the entrance, near the lights, but oftentimes it was difficult to get those spots, and I would have to park farther away on some of the darker streets. Things quickly began escalating at this point. My car was broken into almost weekly. Most of the time, a flower was left, which I always threw on the ground. But once, a pair of men's underwear was left. And even more creepily, once a bag of Tootsie Rolls. Innocuous on its face, but those were my favorite candy. This made me wonder if the person knew me personally, and I started to become suspicious of just about everyone. There was a laundry room in the basement of the apartment, and one day I went down to get a load that finished drying. As I started to fold, I realized all of my undergarments were gone. Another week, I had a male friend over from school, and his tires got slashed during the visit. By the time the first letter arrived, I had already started making plans to move elsewhere. The letter described a love for me that had been going on for years. Whoever this was from noted things that proved he had been watching me closely. I was able to arrange for another friend to take over my lease, and I moved in with another friend on the other side of town. It was a secured building and had an underground parking garage that was only accessible to tenants. I felt much more secure, and the extra money spent was well worth the peace of mind. Things were quiet for a few months, and then my roommate got a boyfriend. Most of us were wary of Ashley's new boyfriend from the beginning. For one, they met on MySpace after he reached out to her. Another reason was that the new boyfriend, Matt, was extremely good looking, and while Ashley was a wonderful person, she wasn't the type you would typically expect someone like him to date. Ashley was thrilled about it though. She had never had a boyfriend and really felt like he was her Prince Charming. I thought he was weird and creepy from the beginning. Matt was on the quiet side and always seemed to be sporting an uncomfortable, nearly leering smile. It was difficult to carry on any sort of conversation with him because he would always make it weird with some random facts that were completely unrelated to what we were talking about. I had deleted my MySpace when my stalking began, but I created a dummy account to learn more about Matt. It didn't look like he really knew any of his friends in real life. There were only pictures of himself, and the rest of the information listed was vague. My friends and I gently tried to discourage Ashley from seeing Matt. He technically hadn't done anything wrong, but he was just so damn strange. She would immediately get defensive and would shut the conversation down. Matt started to spend more and more time at the apartment, and I found myself making any excuse that I could to avoid coming home. One day, I came home from work and found Matt on my couch, alone, drinking a beer. Ashley had been called into work, and she told him that he could just hang out. I was furious because I didn't want to spend any time with him, so I grabbed a beer of my own, along with a snack, and headed off to my room before shutting the door. About 30 minutes or so later, he knocked on my door and suggested we watch some TV and try to get to know each other a little bit better because we both loved Ashley. I didn't want to, but decided that maybe I needed to give it a try. He put on a movie, and I tried to just focus on the movie because I didn't really want to talk to him. At one point, I glanced over to Matt, and he was staring at me with that same familiar smile on his face. I snapped a "what" at him, and he just continued smiling and saying, "I just can't believe it." "Believe what?" I asked. He said nothing and went back to watching the movie, still smiling. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the interaction itself had every hair on my body standing straight up. That's when I excused myself and locked the door to my room. Another month or so went on, and I had managed to avoid being home for much anything beyond sleep and showering. Matt practically lived there now, and had even brought a bunch of his things into Ashley's room. I really didn't want to move again, but was beginning to look for other options. On their 6-month anniversary, I saw a huge bouquet of flowers on the table and an already open card propped up next to it. I rolled my eyes and was about to leave when I decided to see what the weirdo wrote to her. When I opened the card, my heart started beating through my chest. Without even reading the words that he wrote, I was shaking. The handwriting was exactly the same as the letter that my stalker had sent. I had kept them as evidence and dug them out of my desk for comparison. The handwriting was unique, yet identical. This proved to me that Matt was the stalker. I called the police first. As they were on the way, I called Ashley and asked her to come home. She was at work but said she would be there when she could. I was terrified to tell her because I knew she would be shattered. The police took a statement from me and actually went to Ashley's work to get more information from her, and they ended up breaking the news. Apparently, Ashley called Matt and left a furious message, even though the cops told her not to say a thing. And then he completely disappeared after that. There was no Matt or anyone matching his resemblance at the place that he said he worked. Ashley had never been to his apartment because he said he had been staying with friends while trying to save money for a trip to Europe. His family lived out of state, and she had never met a friend of his because he said they had a falling out due to the fact that he was choosing to spend so much time with Ashley. It was all lies, and in the end, she was dating a stranger. We don't even know if Matt was his real name. The cherry on top of this whole thing was when we went through Matt's things. He had left everything when he disappeared, and Ashley and I decided to go through it. There was a duffel bag that was full of gym clothes, but in one of the compartments, there were about 10 pictures of me. All were taken from far away, with the exception of one of me sleeping. The sheets on my bed were current, so I know it had to have been in this current apartment before I started locking my bedroom door at night. A few of the pictures dated back to before the incident at my parents' house, which all but confirmed that that was him as well. 2 pairs of my missing underwear were there, and I shudder to think of what he did with the rest. A Starbucks lid with my red lipstick marks, a necklace that I hadn't even noticed was missing, along with a few other random 6 souvenirs. The cops never tracked Matt down. I decided to accept an opportunity overseas that I had been considering and got the hell out of there. Unfortunately, Ashley and I quickly drifted apart afterwards. She had a really hard time accepting that her first love was a complete and utter psycho. I think I had some underlying anger directed at her, maybe misplaced, for believing all of his lies and letting him into our lives. I don't know what his endgame was. Would he have tried to hurt me? Or was he simply content with me being in his world? I'll never know. Being stalked changes you though. Even when I lived across the world, I'd find myself looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I still have no social media accounts attached to my real name. I'm now married with children, and I know that this man moved on to torment some other poor woman. But every time I visit my hometown, I'm tense, and I do my best to keep a low profile. Part of me will always have this feeling, somewhere between wonder and worry, if Matt will ever resurface again. I'm going to dive into a story from my past. I was 14 years old, and at this time in my life, I was deep into rebellion. Against my parents, against teachers, against anyone who tried to tell me what to do. A year earlier, I'd been caught with weed at school, and eventually arrested for marijuana possession, which meant court-ordered NA meetings and counseling. Looking back, I was just a kid going through a rough patch, but at the time, I thought I was untouchable. For these meetings, my mom would drop me off once a week for my NA group, which met from 8 to 10 p.m. in a rather sketchy part of town. She didn't realize it back then, but the building was surrounded by halfway houses. The one we met in was just one of many on that block, actually. The guys in my NA group were incredible. Most of them had lived through absolute hell and were clawing their way back out. They didn't try to talk down to me. They listened. They gave me advice that stuck with me for years afterward. They were tough, but they were kind too, and they treated me like someone worth looking out for. What I didn't realize at the time was that one night, they'd end up protecting me from something that could have gone very, very wrong. Because the meeting house sat on a one-way street with no parking, my mom's routine was to leave the car at a gas station about 2.5 blocks away. She'd wait there, and I'd walk over after the meeting. Any other time, it was no big deal. But one night, that simple walk almost changed everything. The meeting let out, and I started heading down the street toward the gas station. It was summer, but the sun had already set, and it was late enough that the whole block was dim, lit up only by a few scattered street lamps. When I reached the last house on the block, just before I was supposed to turn left, that's when I noticed 5 or 6 guys sitting out on the porch of that final house. I noticed one of them had a small mirror balanced on his lap. And even as a 14-year-old youth, that was the telltale sign of somebody using coke. Once they spotted me, they called out to me, asked me my name and where I was going. I ignored them as best as I could and just tried to pick up my pace. But that's when, in unison, they all stood up. They started moving towards me, still calling out questions, and one of them asked me for the time. I don't know what it was about at that moment, but something in my gut screamed run. So I did just that. I didn't think twice. I turned and bolted back down the street towards the meeting house that I had just come from. But those guys came after me. I could hear their footsteps pounding the pavement right behind me, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to outrun them for much longer. The only chance that I thought I had was to hide. I ducked into the nearest driveway, dropped to the ground, and scrambled under a parked truck. My chest was pressed against the dirt with my heart hammering so loud that I thought that would give me away. Once I settled into my hiding spot, I realized just how close they were. I heard one of them yell, "Where the f did she go? Find her." I stayed perfectly still, trying not to even breathe, waiting for the feeling of hands grabbing my ankles and dragging me out from under the truck. I could hear them moving through the yard, kicking through bushes, obviously searching for me. It felt like forever, though it probably wasn't more than a few minutes. Finally, they gave up, convinced that I'd somehow gotten away. I heard them cussing as they headed back towards their porch. I didn't wait, though. Once I felt like they were far enough away, I slid out from under the truck and continued running. I vaulted a fence that separated the yard I was in from the halfway house where my meeting had been. Both my arms and legs were shaking, but I forced myself inside. The group was still hanging around, talking like they always did after meetings. When they saw me sweating, trembling, and trying to get words out, they knew that something was wrong. I told them everything. I don't remember their names anymore, but I'll never forget the way they reacted to this. The joking and casual conversation stopped instantly. They surrounded me, calmed my nerves, and told me that I was safe. And then several of them stood up with this quiet, deadly serious look in their eyes. I don't know what they did when they left, and honestly, I probably don't want to. But I know that they weren't going to let what happened slide. The ones who stayed behind made sure I wasn't alone. They walked me the rest of the way to the gas station, surrounding me like a protective wall. When we got there, my mom was already waiting, anxious because I was late. We told her what had happened, and she drove us straight to the police station to make a report. Like most stories you'll hear here, we never heard back about whether anything came of it. No arrests or follow-ups, but in my heart, I'm certain my NA guys made sure those men thought twice about trying anything like that again. I didn't realize it at the time, but part of the reason I mentioned those guys from my NA group is because they weren't just fellow attendees. They became my guardians that night. They didn't just give me advice. They gave me safety when I needed it the most. And without them, I don't know how that night would have ended. I still think about it sometimes, especially how close I came to being pulled out from under that truck. I don't think I've ever been that scared before or since in my life. And as reckless and rebellious as I was back then, that moment sobered me in a way that nothing else could have. I wish I remembered those guys' names. I wish I could thank them all now. But all I can do is hold on to the memory of how they protected me, and how for once in my teenage chaos, I realized there were people who genuinely cared whether I made it home safe or not. This message will likely never make it to them, but I still want to say thank you nonetheless.